Rain pattered softly against the window pane, its steady rhythm a sharp contrast to the thumping of my heart. My eyelids drooped, heavy from the weight of sleepless nights, as I lay cocooned in my darkened room. Every shadow seemed to stretch and twist into grotesque shapes, but I knew it was just my mind, playing tricks as it often did these days. Outside, the wind howled like a wailing banshee, yet it was not these sounds that unsettled me. Rather, it was the silence that would occasionally fall, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I had moved into the old Finley house on the outskirts of town about 3 weeks ago. My friends thought I was crazy, going to live alone in a house that everyone whispered about. They said it was cursed, haunted, or worse, but I didn't believe in such things. At least, not until I started hearing the footsteps. They were soft, hesitant, as if someone was trying not to be heard. Every night, they would start at the stroke of midnight, pacing back and forth in the attic directly above my bedroom. Tonight was no different. As the clock chimed 12, the footsteps resumed with a maddening regularity. I pulled the covers tighter around me, trying to ignore the sounds, but then something new happened. A cold whisper floated through the room, "You're not alone." The voice was barely audible, like the breath of a ghost, and I sat up, my eyes scanning the darkness. "No, this can't be real," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the fear. But then the temperature dropped, and my breath fogged in the air. I could see my breath, a ghostly vapor in the moonlit room, and my heart raced even faster. I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards cold under my feet. "This is just a house," I whispered into the dark, "just a house." I decided to investigate, to prove to myself that it was all in my head. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended to the attic. The door was ajar, which I didn't remember leaving open. I pushed it, and it gave way with a groan. Inside, the attic was filled with shadows that seemed to dance as my flashlight beam cut through them. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and frightened, even to my own ears. There was no answer, only the sound of the rain hitting the roof, a comforting naturalness in the midst of my fear. I stepped further inside, my eyes catching on a shape in the far corner of the room. It was a trunk, old and covered in dust. Curiosity overcame my fear, and I approached it, my hands trembling as I lifted the lid. Inside, there was a pile of old, yellowed papers and photographs. I picked one up, squinting in the dim light. It was a picture of the house, dated back to 1893. A family stood in front of it, their expressions somber. As I flicked through more photos, I noticed one figure appeared in every picture, but always in the background, slightly blurred, as if moving at the moment the photograph was taken. Chills ran down my spine as I looked closer. The figure was tall, dressed in black, and their face was indistinct, a blur of shadows and light. My heart pounded, and I dropped the photograph. It floated to the floor, landing face up. The eyes of the figure seemed to bore into mine, and I felt a sudden gust of wind as if a window had been thrown open. But the windows were closed. I turned around, and that's when I saw her. A woman, pale as death, her eyes hollow and dark. She was wearing what looked like an old-fashioned morning gown, and she floated inches off the ground. "You found my pictures?" she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the cramped space. I stumbled backward, tripping over the trunk. "Who are you?" I managed to gasp, my voice a mix of fear and disbelief. "The lady of the house," she responded, her voice growing colder. "And you shouldn't be here." Before I could reply, she vanished, as if she had never been there. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and fled the attic. I didn't stop running until I was back in my bedroom, the door locked behind me. My chest heaved as I leaned against the door, listening. The footsteps had stopped, but the whispering hadn't. It was all around me now, a cacophony of voices that filled the room. "You're not alone," they whispered over and over until I clapped my hands over my ears. But it did no good. The voices were inside my head, an unending chorus that refused to be silenced. I slid down to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. The rain continued to fall, a steady drumming on the roof that was somehow both terrifying and soothing. The whispering faded as dawn approached, the first light of morning filtering through the curtains. I was exhausted, drained by fear and confusion, but I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet now, but I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Tonight, the sun would set and the darkness would return. And with it, the footsteps, the whispering, and the lady of the house. As I sat there, waiting for the inevitable, I realized that I had to find out what was happening to uncover the secrets hidden within these walls. The photographs, the woman, the voices, they were all pieces of a puzzle that I needed to solve. Because somewhere, in the depths of this haunted house, there was an answer waiting for me. An answer that I feared, yet desperately needed to find. But for now, I had to wait, and listen to the rain, hoping against hope that the day would bring some form of solace. The day dragged on, every tick of the clock stretching out longer than the last. The rain continued to beat a steady rhythm on the windows, a natural metronome to my frayed nerves. I spent the daylight hours searching the house, looking for anything that could explain the night's terrors. The house was old, the floors creaking with every step, the walls lined with faded wallpaper that whispered of bygone eras. In the library, I found a book, its cover worn and the pages yellowed with age. It was a diary belonging to Elizabeth Finley, the original mistress of the house. Her entries were neat, the script flowing elegantly across the pages. As I read, I could almost hear her voice, tinged with an accent of old-world aristocracy. "He's watching me," one entry read, dated October 5th, 1894. "I see him in the shadows, feel his breath on my neck in the still of the night." My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Each entry grew darker, more desperate. Elizabeth wrote of her husband, Jonathan, who had grown cold and distant. She spoke of hearing whispers, of seeing figures in the corners of her eyes. And then, the entries stopped abruptly, mid-sentence, the pen trailing off the page as if she had been interrupted. A chill ran down my spine. The similarities between her experiences and mine were uncanny, unsettling. I placed the diary back on the shelf, my mind racing with questions. Who was watching her? Was it the same presence haunting me now? I left the library, the echo of my footsteps a grim reminder of the footsteps I would hear again come midnight. As the sun set, the house seemed to close in on me, the shadows deepening, turning the familiar into the grotesque. I tried to eat, but my appetite was gone, stolen by fear. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, listening to the rain and waiting for night to fall in full. When it came, the darkness was almost palpable, a cloak that smothered the light and brought with it the cold whispers of the past. I decided to confront whatever haunted this house, to demand answers that I was not sure I wanted to know. I went to the attic, the air growing colder as I climbed the stairs. The door was slightly ajar, just as I had left it in my haste to escape that morning. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was bathed in moonlight, shadows dancing across the floor. "I know you're here," I called into the darkness. "Show yourself." The air shifted, the temperature dropping until I could see my breath. Then she appeared, the lady of the house, her form more defined than the night before. Her eyes were dark hollows, her skin ghostly pale. "Why do you disturb my rest?" Her voice was a whisper, yet it filled the room, echoing against the walls. "I want to know what happened here, what happened to you," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She floated closer, her feet never touching the ground. "You seek answers that you may not want to find," she warned, her tone mournful. "This house is cursed, bound by a sorrow that will not fade." "Who cursed it? Why?" I asked, my curiosity overpowering my fear. "It was my husband," she said, her voice a sigh. "He delved into darkness, into things no man should know. He made a pact, a terrible pact, and it destroyed us all." I swallowed hard, the implications of her words sinking in. "What kind of pact?" "A pact with the shadows, with creatures that are not of this world," she replied. Her eyes seemed to flicker with an inner light, a tormented knowledge that flickered like a candle in the wind. "He thought it would bring us wealth, power. But it brought only death." The room grew colder, if that was possible, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. But there was nothing, only the empty room and the shadows. When I looked back, the lady was gone, vanished as if she had never been there. The whispering started then, a chorus of voices, not just one. They murmured around me, words intertwining until they were indistinct. "Leave," one voice hissed. "Stay," another whispered seductively. I stepped out of the attic, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that shook the walls. I stumbled down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. In the daylight hours were a brief reprieve, a time when the whispers and shadows retreated to the darker corners of the house. I used this time to explore more, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth. Each room held echoes of the past, fragments of lives long since ended. The air was heavy with a sadness that seeped into my bones, a melancholic weight that made each step harder than the last. In the study, I found a series of letters hidden in a false bottom of a drawer. They were written by Jonathan Finley, Elizabeth's husband. His handwriting was erratic, the ink blotted in places where his pen must have paused, or perhaps trembled. "I fear I have doomed us," he wrote in one. "The shadows whisper promises, but their eyes are full of lies." His words were a chilling echo of the ghostly warnings I had received. Another letter detailed a ritual, a dark and forbidden ceremony meant to bring about prosperity, but at a grave cost. The edges of the paper were charred, as if someone had tried to burn it, then thought better of it. My hands shook as I read, the implications horrifying. It wasn't just their lives that had been destroyed, but their very souls had been bound to the house, caught in an endless loop of sorrow and fear. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows, a sense of dread settled over me. Night was coming, and with it, the return of the whispers and the apparitions. I could not leave, not yet, not until I had all the answers. Even as fear clawed at my throat, curiosity drove me deeper into the mystery. The shadows grew longer, the house groaning as if in pain. I returned to the attic, the site of so many eerie encounters. The air was colder here, the atmosphere charged with a silent anticipation. I know what Jonathan did. I called into the darkness. I know about the pact. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then a low laugh, chilling and mirthless, echoed around me. "You know nothing," a voice hissed from the shadows. The pact was only the beginning. I spun around, flashlight slicing through the darkness. There, in the corner, the shadows coalesced into a figure, tall and imposing. Its eyes were pits of despair, its mouth a twisted line of torment. Jonathan summoned us, it said, its voice a chorus of despair. But he could not control us. We are bound here, but we are not his servants. Who are you? I demanded, my voice steady despite the terror that gripped me. We are the forgotten, the consumed, it replied. We are the shadows he sought to command, and now we are tethered to this place, to these walls of sorrow. The air grew colder still, a frost that seemed to seep into my very bones. What do you want? I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to hear the answer. Release, it said simply. Release from this torment, from this endless night. And you will help us, won't you? Before I could answer, the apparition vanished, leaving behind a cold so intense it burned. I stumbled back, gasping for breath. The house felt alive, the walls whispering with voices of the past, each one a plea for freedom, for peace. I knew then what I had to do. The ritual that Jonathan had started, I needed to finish it, but not to bind the spirits here, to release them. I gathered the letters, the diary, the photographs. Each piece was a part of the puzzle, a clue to the final act. The night deepened, the house settling around me with creaks and moans. I prepared in the main hall, the air thick with anticipation. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, watching, waiting. I could feel their eyes on me, their hopes mingling with my fear. I began the ritual, reading from Jonathan's notes, the words echoing in the hollow space. The air vibrated with energy, the shadows drawing closer. The wind howled, a gale that rattled the windows, that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. I spoke the final words, a plea not for power or wealth, but for release, for peace. The house trembled, a deep rumbling that grew until it was all I could hear. Then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. I held my breath, waiting. Slowly, the dawn began to break, the first light creeping through the windows. The shadows receded, pulling back with a reluctance that was almost palpable. As the light grew, the house felt different, lighter. The oppressive atmosphere was lifting, the whispers fading into nothing. But the story was not over yet. As the sun rose, I felt a pull, a tug at the very fabric of my being. The shadows had receded, but they had left something behind, a thread connecting me to the house, to its past, its secrets. I knew then that my role in this tale was not finished. There were more secrets to uncover, more mysteries to unravel. The house had released its ghosts, but in doing so, it had claimed something from me in return. As I stood in the light of the new day, I knew I could not leave, not yet. There were answers here, answers I still needed to find. The house had stories yet to tell, and I had to listen. The end of the night was just the beginning of another chapter, one that I would face with a new understanding, with a resolve to see it through to the end, wherever it might lead. The morning light streamed into the old Finley house, casting away the darkest shadows, but not the lingering sense of unease that clung to the air like a persistent fog. I felt drained, as though the night's ritual had taken more than just energy. It had siphoned a part of my soul, leaving me tethered to the spirits and their centuries-old grief. I needed to understand why the house had claimed a piece of me, why the spirits had not found their complete release. As I roamed the now quiet halls, the silence was a stark contrast to the night's eerie cacophony. Yet, in this silence lay whispers of the past, still echoing through the walls, telling tales of sorrow, betrayal, and curses long held. It was in the library, amidst the musty tomes and faded maps of forgotten worlds, that I found it, an ancient book bound in leather, its cover cracked and worn. The book seemed to pulsate with a cold energy, the title embossed in gold, yet faded by time, rituals, and realms beyond. Flipping through its brittle pages, I found references to the pact Jonathan Finley had made and, crucially, a way to sever the ties that bound the spirits and myself to this place. The ritual required during the witching hour, under a waning moon, promised a final release, not just for the trapped souls, but for the house itself. It would cleanse the land, breaking the endless cycle of night and torment. Preparations took days. I gathered rare herbs, whispered incantations over sacred candles, and marked the floors with sigils of freedom and release. As the moon reached the exact phase needed, the air in the house thickened, anticipation building in every creak and groan of the old wooden structure. The witching hour approached, the house shrouded in darkness, the only light provided by the candles' flickering flames casting large, dancing shadows against the walls. I began the ritual, chanting the ancient words, feeling the energy swirling around me, a maelstrom of power and fear. "Spirits of the house, hear my plea," I intoned, the words resonating through the halls. "Break the bonds that hold thee here, release thyself and this place from darkness." The air crackled, the shadows twisting and turning as if in agony. A wind whipped up within the house, the candles flickering violently, threatening to extinguish. I repeated the chant, louder, more forceful. "Return to the light, be freed from this night." Suddenly, a scream, piercing and raw, cut through the night. It was the lady, her visage appearing before me, contorted in a mix of rage and relief. "You dare to send us away?" she shrieked, her form becoming more solid, more terrifying. "I seek to free us all." I shouted back, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped my heart. "This has to end, now and forever." The house shook, as if in the throes of an earthquake, the air thick with the power of unbound spirits. Then, as quickly as it had escalated, everything stopped. The candles snuffed out, plunging me into darkness. A heavy silence fell, oppressive and complete. I fumbled for a flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. The house was still, eerily so. Slowly, I made my way to the window, the first light of dawn peeking over the horizon. As the sunlight filled the room, it felt different, lighter, as if a tremendous weight had been lifted. Days passed, and the house remained quiet. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by a sense of peace that pervaded the once cursed halls. I packed my belongings, each item feeling less burdened than when I had arrived. As I closed the door behind me, I looked back at the old Finley house one last time. It no longer felt like a trap or a prison, but just a house, old and worn, but free. Walking away, I felt the last of the ties binding me to the house dissolve, a final wave of relief washing over me. The spirits were at rest, the curse broken, and I was free. The Finley house would stand still, perhaps to be reclaimed by nature or find a new purpose under new ownership, but the horrors that had once echoed through its halls were silenced, locked away in the past, never to torment again. The rain began to fall, light and refreshing, cleansing the air, washing away the last remnants of the night. I turned away, stepping forward into a new day, free from the shadows that had once clouded my path. The story of the Finley house was over, its final chapter written, a tale of darkness turned to light, of a curse broken by courage and a desire for freedom. As I moved forward, the house faded into the background, a mere speck in the rearview mirror of my life. A chilling chapter concluded on a hopeful note.